President Buhari meets UK Prime Minister Theresa May on deepening relations between Nigeria and the United Kingdom.
Vice President Oshibaja urges Nigerian youths to take up science and technology education for national development.
ECOWAS Parliament Committee ends session in Dakar, calls on member countries to ratify African Union Kampala Convention on displaced persons.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on the implications of Nigeria's 198 million population estimates announced recently by the National Population Commission.
And it is official. Nigeria is now the 7th most populous country in the world, with a population of 198 million people. This figure is from the chairman of the National Population Commission, Mr. Eze Duru-Iheoma, who is in New York for the 51st session of the Commission on Population and Development.
Now, since the last population census in the year 2006, there have been all kinds of speculative figures of Nigeria's population above the official figure that was declared that year.
Well, experts said that Nigeria's population, which remains the highest in Africa, has been growing at an average rate of 6.5%. Little wonder that the World Population Prospect predicts that by the year 2050, Nigeria will move from the 7th to the 3rd most populous country in the world.
However, more worrisome is the rate of urbanization. Now, according to the National Population Commission chairman, while delivering Nigeria's statement on sustainable cities, human mobility, and international migration at the New York meeting, it said that the urban population within Nigeria had been growing at an average yearly rate of about 6.5%, and that's been for the past 5 decades.
And indeed, it's a serious problem for development. To many, this is the root of the myriads of urban-related challenges like overcrowding, severe shortage of housing, water, road, inadequate healthcare services, high maternal mortality, said to be the highest in the world, as well as poor school infrastructure.
Now, one question to ask is whether Nigeria is overpopulated. Now, overpopulation, according to experts, refers to a situation whereby people living in an environment exceed the quantum of resources available to meet their needs. Now, the experts believe that from all indications, Nigeria is indeed overpopulated, and that's one of the biggest challenges the country faces at the moment.
Now, take, for instance, the National Bureau of Statistics that says young people of teen age and adolescent boys and girls, women of childbearing age, and the people of working age are mostly involved in urbanization and migration amongst the population. This, they say, is fueling unemployment, put at an average of 18.4%, and this is indicative of the nation's cities' widespread poverty, underemployment, and unemployment.
According to the World Poverty Clock, this, of course, is a time bomb. Now, the clock says that the country's struggle with overpopulation will be a problem right now rather than in the year 2050. And currently, some 82 million Nigerians are said to be poor. And that's, of course, a significant population, a significant percentage, rather, of the country's population.
Developing worlds in Asia and Latin America, fertility rates have fallen sharply in recent generations, just above 2 children per woman. This transformation was driven in each country by a mix of educational and employment opportunities for women, access to contraception, urbanization, and evolving middle class. Whether similar forces will diffuse the population bomb in Nigeria is unclear.
Now, is Nigeria's 198 million population a blessing or a challenge? What exactly are the forces driving the country's current population boom? And are we doing enough family planning awareness? And what is the relationship between the population boom and economic growth?
Well, these and other questions we'll try to provide answers to on this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. We're live on the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, and we are Africa's largest television network. I'm Rhoda Anonam.
I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Rhoda in also welcoming you to the program, in the course of which we shall have our companion segments, including newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and others. In the meantime, we're taking it off with the news, and our colleague Anne Jibuno is right here. Hi, Anne. Good morning and welcome.
Yeah, good morning, Kingsley and Rhoda. Good morning. Welcome to the news. Nigeria and the United Kingdom are working towards deepening relations between the two countries in various economic sectors. This was when the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, received President Muhammadu Buhari at 10 Downing Street. Prime Minister May commended President Buhari for his efforts at fighting terrorism, corruption, diversifying the economy, and sustenance of democracy. Nigeria and Britain, she said, have a long history of trade relations which can be enhanced for the benefit of the two countries. President Muhammadu Buhari expressed Nigeria's appreciation to Britain for tremendously supporting the country's efforts at tackling terrorism and insurgency. The President and Prime Minister May later went into a closed-door session with their respective country delegations to discuss other areas of common interest.
Significant advances that have been made in that area with both the work that you've done on Nigeria's economic reform, but also the increasing trade, and there is much that we can build on between our two countries. So I'm looking forward to our discussions here.
The help we are getting in terms of intelligence and the training for our armed forces that have been fighting Boko Haram for all these years, we are very grateful for that.
In the meantime, the U.S. President Donald Trump has extended a diplomatic invitation to the Nigerian leader, President Muhammadu Buhari, who is the champion of the African Union anti-graft war for 2018. President Buhari, who is currently in the UK ahead of the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, will be the guest of U.S. President on the 30th of April in Washington, D.C. According to the statement, Trump will discuss issues such as promoting economic growth and fighting terrorism with President Buhari. A statement from the White House says that the relationship of the United States with Nigeria is deep and strong, and Nigeria's economic growth, security, and leadership in Africa will advance mutual prosperity. Nigeria has been combating the terrorist organization Boko Haram since 2009. The State Department under Trump approved the sale of 12 high-technology attack plans and equipment worth $600 million to Nigeria last year after the Obama administration halted the sale because of accusations that Nigeria's Air Force was bombing civilians. The scheduled meeting will be the second between the two leaders, as both last September met on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly during a luncheon Trump held for a select group of African leaders. Now to other matters, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has reiterated the importance of science and technology education to national growth and development and urged the youth to take up the challenge. The Vice President said this when he hosted a group of young Nigerian scientists that represented the country at the 2017 Robotic Olympic competition in Washington, D.C.
That this team stays together. Very, very important, and that they're able to grow their ideas. One of the things that I've always wondered about, and perhaps is something the Honourable Minister might want to look at, is how we can set up some kind of an institute, especially looking at the 14 great scientific challenges or engineering challenges, as they call them.
The imperative for African nations to harness the tremendous resources at their disposal for the socioeconomic development of the continent came to the fore when the Senate leader, Ahmed Lawan, received the presidential aspirant of Pan-African Parliament from Egypt.
Any country that works towards resolving the challenges of youthful power and energy that is there lying west is someone that we have to partner with. So we want to see the African Parliament talking more and more about this as well.
Well, similarly, the regional discussion of the Joint Committee of ECOWAS Parliament wants member countries yet to ratify African Union Kampala Convention on the protection and assistance to displaced persons to do so urgently in the interest of the respect of human rights. This is one of the 9 recommendations of the committee's meeting in Dakar, which will be submitted to the Parliament at plenary in May in Abuja. Joseph Orok reports that the Speaker of the Parliament, Mustafa Siselo, who declared the meeting closed, lauded the Joint Committee and resource persons for contributing ideas to the protection of human rights in crisis areas.
We make recommendations for our governments and for the international community, especially Amnesty that are here, so that we can take reports back home and chart a course to make sure that we bring normalcy to West Africa.
Well, as the global security threat continues to be volatile and complex, militaries of different countries must create a unified approach to tackle emerging challenges. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Abayomi Olonisaki, said this at the opening ceremony of the African Land Forces Summit holding in Abuja.
At a better time, a time of regional and sub-regional challenges and asymmetric threats, and concerted efforts on our part to counter and neutralize these threats.
Meanwhile, 2 out of 14 pilots winged by the Nigerian Air Force are from the Armed Forces of Liberia. This would further strengthen bilateral relationship and collaboration between both countries. A total of 25 pilots have been winged by the Nigerian Air Force this year.
I urge you not to forget the 3 Ds to success, which are drive, discipline, and desire in the quest for daily improvement. Remember that you are being inducted into the flying operations at a key moment in our nation's history.
Well, with the growing consciousness of Nigerians, Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onogen, says there is more pressure on the nation's justice system. He has therefore called on the nation's magistrates to rise to the growing patronage of their courts. He made the call at the opening of a refresher course for magistrates in the country.
Our ability to respond to the growing demands of judicial services goes a long way in determining our credibility and integrity. You will agree with me that we must continuously rise to the occasion in order to justify public confidence reposed in the judiciary.
Well, that's the news for now. Good morning, Nigeria. We'll be back with Rhoda and Kingsley after this break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem frontally through revival of agriculture.
Is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Go to my son's room and get pregnant.
Countless women suffer under the misconception that when a woman is childless or fails to conceive within the clock time set for her by family and society, then it must be the woman's fault.
Enough is enough. She must leave my son's house.
So childless women suffer the pains of childlessness, and they also suffer the rejection of family and blame of society. This problem is placed side by side with the issue of those who sell their babies.
You did what?
I don't sell my picking.
In this episode, titled Childless Wives, join us this week as a rib-cracking comedy takes a semi-comic look at issues of childlessness and child harvesting.
I want to get pregnant as easily as you do it. And I swear by my life, I will die for my child.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
The largest data network, Glow Unlimited.
NTA Television College, an affiliate of Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, has over the years maintained her reputation of putting together courses that are highly relevant to manpower needs of the broadcast industry. The college is again organizing a 4-week course on computer graphics and animation to train new entrants and retrain existing media operatives in these critical areas of broadcast media. The course is designed for non-linear editors, animators, producers of puppets and graphics. Date 16th April to 11th May 2018. The college also has another 4-week course on English grammar and pronunciation for broadcasters, slated for 21st May to 15th June 2018. Come and take advantage of our top-notch and intensive course designed to grow the skills of television presenters, script writers, news editors, journalists, hosts of live events in just 4 weeks. Venue for both courses will be at the multipurpose complex, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos. Fee is 100,000 naira per participant for both courses, accommodation inclusive. Be there. NTA Television College, Jos, training you to be the best you can be.
Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. Now, on our business news segment, the Debt Management Office injects 400 billion naira into the economy to reduce lending rates. Plus, economic experts across the globe meet to discuss issues affecting the global economy. Let's get more details now from Comfort Amadou.
Welcome to Business News. I'm Comfort Amadou. The Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, and Central Bank of Nigerian Governor Godwin Emefiele are in Washington, D.C. to join other economic experts from around the world to discuss issues affecting the global economy. The spring meeting of the IMF and World Bank brings together central bankers, ministers of finance, parliamentarians, and experts to discuss issues on poverty eradication, world economic outlook, and aid effectiveness around the globe. The meeting, which is underway, will end on 22nd April 2018. And in a related development, Minister of Trade and Investment from the 53 Commonwealth nations are setting the tone for the 2018 Heads of Government meeting scheduled for Tuesday in London, the United Kingdom. Top on the agenda is improvement of intra-Commonwealth trade, which is projected to hit $1.6 trillion by 2020. Back at home, the Debt Management Office says the federal government has injected about 400 billion naira into the Nigerian economy. The fund is government's strategy to reduce its debt profile as well as interest rate on government's lending from 18% to 14%, which would improve the ability of financial institutions to lend to the real sector. And from the equities market, it was a red start for the Nigerian Stock Exchange as the real share index closed negative at 40,533.37 basis points. Market capitalization closed at 14 trillion naira as investors traded 192 million shares in 3,917 deals. That's business news for now.
Thank you very much, Comfort, for the business package. Next for us is a review of the headlines on the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
Our regular newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toyobi, is in the studio. Bayo, good morning.
Morning, Rhoda.
Good to see you.
Good morning, Kinsley, and good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah, Bayo, pleasure to have you join us for the review of the papers this morning. Rhoda, let's begin with you.
All right, we'll begin with the New Telegraph. Let's begin with the lead stories first. On New Telegraph, it says headers ambush policemen, kill 43 in Benue, Nasarawa. With riders there, police officers missing. Soldiers kill 4 headsmen. German contractor kidnapped, police escort murdered. That's the lead story for the New Telegraph. And of course, the picture story is also there's trending on most of the dailies this morning. Now to the Daily Sun. It says 41 killed in Benue, Kano, Nasarawa, 4 policemen, villagers, headsmen amongst the dead. 11 missing, German engineer kidnapped. And there's a story that says counters out of APC tenure elongation crisis, says INEC. And that's the lead story for the Daily Sun and the New Telegraph.
All right, now from the Guardian newspaper, the lead story says police Shiites clash over detained leader in Abuja. With 2 riders, Islamic group vows more protest, and stakeholders seek release of Adeonju. That's the lead story for the Guardian. And for the Daily Independent, the lead story says headsmen kill 32 in Nasarawa, and 9 police officers in Benue. With a number of riders there, we have 6 riders to that very headline. Indeed, there are other headlines. Some of the riders, of course, relate to the story on the police Shiites clash. Army kills 4 headers in shootout in Benue. Gunmen kill policeman, kidnap German in Kano. Landslide kills 2 and injures 3 in Jigawa. And 1 killed, many injured as police Shiites clash in Abuja, and set vows to vote against Buhari in 2019, why Tijaniya movement shut down Abuja last week. Now, above the nameplate of the Daily Independent newspaper, there is a headline, I am not bothered about 2019 election. That's according to President Buhari. Says he's concentrating on the economy and security. Now, those are the headlines.
That story is also trending on the Daily Sun. Is just above the nameplate. It says, just beside the nameplate on the Daily Sun, it says, I'm more worried about security, economy than 2019 polls, Buhari tells the British Prime Minister. Bayo, let's begin with the meeting between President Muhammadu Buhari and the British Prime Minister yesterday.
Well, this is the beginning of the bilateral talks between the President and the Prime Minister, Theresa May. It is today, Chogom is beginning, but while he was being received by the host had cautioned about politics being at the corner, and the president expressed concern that his response, politicians are concerned about politics, but he is concerned about the economy and security. He also thanked the British government and the British people for the confidence they have had in Nigeria, because British companies have consistently and persistently stayed with Nigeria. And he also explained that he's pleased with the success in agriculture. People are now going back to the farm, and he talked about education as well as climate change. However, she says, like Oliver Twist, Nigeria will still want more assistance, and the Prime Minister promised to support Nigeria, particularly in the area of training and securing equipping the military. She also particularly expressed concern about the abduction of young schoolgirls by Boko Haram, noting that the British will continue to assist Nigeria to check those excesses. Chogom is beginning today and will last up to Friday. The papers are dominated with very violent stories of several deaths. The Sun is reporting about 41 killed in Benue, Kano, and Nasarawa. And Telegraph is reporting, in fact, 43 dead. It said there was an ambush of policemen and 43 were killed. And that paper is creating the impression that all the 43 that were killed were in Benue State. But the report from the Sun indicates that this is incidences across 3 states, Benue, Kano, and Nasarawa. In fact, there was also one in Kaduna where a German was also among those that have been kidnapped. The ascendancy and increase in criminality is a matter of concern. And it's not only left to Benue, Kano, and Nasarawa. Even in Niger State, the police have paraded 19 suspects, among whom were 2 who are alleged to always operate as a gang. They attack people, they board motorcycles, and attack motorcycles by seizing their motorcycles. When the motorcycles resist, they end up either amputating their wrists or cutting off their fingers. And they are among those that they have been paraded by the police. A sad one also in Ilorin. A 25-year-old man had committed suicide. And how did that happen? He had betted with his motorcycle that he used for running for his daily means of livelihood to bet that Barcelona will qualify for semi-finals. Well, the goal margin was 4-1 at the initial stage, and he was sure that Barcelona would certainly qualify. Roma beat Barcelona 3-0, and on the strength of away goals, Roma qualified. And so he lost his bet and lost the motorcycle. The next thing they found was he was dangling in his bedroom. And this needs to be emphasized because people just don't take football as a sport. Some take with so much passion that if you go around viewing centers around the country, at the end of football matches, there are instances of scuffles and fights emanating from arguments. In fact, Bauchi State government some time ago contemplated the idea of prescribing usage of viewing centers because there were instances whereby young men were fighting with knives after arguing about a football match. Football matches played far away in Europe, and our boys are busy harming themselves here in Nigeria.
And if you were to ask them about the local league, yes, they might have little or no knowledge of what is happening. Well, the suicide over obsession. Yes, suicide over soccer matches. It's not something that is new, but it's worrisome. Regardless, 40 years ago, if you recall, during the 1978 World Cup, Tunisia beat Mexico 3-1 at the World Cup, and the Mexican committed suicide, saying that it was unthinkable at that time that an African side, could beat soccer giants such as Mexico. But since then, of course, we have seen the performance of Nigeria, Cameroon, and others at the World Cup. All right, let's return to the papers and then deal with the other headlines. Second list story on the front page for the Guardian newspapers is APC, INEC reject Yakasai's claim on 2015 elections. And with 2 riders, YCE, that's the Yoruba Council of Elders, seeks a probe of alleged rigging, and Agbakoba urges vigilance over 2019 poll. Now, the other headlines are also there, but I'm not bothered about, I am more bothered about security and economy, not 2019 elections. That's according to the President Buhari. Now, health workers begin indefinite strike tomorrow, page 3 of The Guardian. On page 5, police lose 4 officers to headers attacks in Benue. And then residents and structures in grave danger as tankers and trucks defy Lagos governments and military orders to quit bridges.
And on the New Telegraph, just below, that's above the nameplate now, it says Boko Haram Air Force acquires 6 new helicopters. That's on page 5. And then the story Kingsley just read now, health workers begin nationwide strike tomorrow. And that's on page 7. But there's an interesting story just below the nameplate there. And it says primary school dropout runs hospital labs as medical doctor. Primary school dropout runs a hospital and lab as a medical director. That's a story that's on page 9. That's I'll come to you shortly. Let's talk about that. But just below the Daily Sun now, just down, just beside the picture story, so World Bank won't grant loan to any state without Kaduna, says El Rufai. Well, those are the stories that are trending this morning. Well, let's begin with that story. A school dropout running.
Yes. Ironically,
a medical center?
Yes. A primary school dropout is running a laboratory and a medical facility and is functioning there as a doctor. And guess what? He cannot read and write. Wow. This is a chap who started in hawking drugs and graduated into establishing a lab facility. And he says he has confessed to the police that he actually measures blood pressure and sometimes administers intravenous injections. And guess where he is operating? Idiaraba, very close to the University of Lagos Teaching Hospital.
Wow.
But he's now in the police net.
Who were his patrons?
Of course, residents around
Citizens who did not know that he's
who
a quack.
Who were his nurses?
Probably they think they can't afford going to the hospital and they prefer to go to the roadside, and then they got themselves that difficult deal. No, police have not reported how many victims have been either misdiagnosed or probably even killed from his
unfortunately. Yeah, that's you know, oftentimes the response of citizens where they feel challenged by access to public health facilities. Usually the tendency is for them to say, okay, oh no, let's go to a private clinic. Yeah, and a private clinic, oftentimes you have no more than a desk and a stethoscope, as you have just indicated, and then you're able to measure blood pressure. Virtually everybody can do that, but it's a pity and it's a tragedy. But the thing is to bring him to heel and let him face the consequences of the law. Now, let's take this other story from the Daily Independent, and then we'll take the editorial. The editorial, it says, this is Daily Independent now, right at the foot of the front page. Oil subsidy payments shrinks states' FAC monthly allocations. That story is there. And another one again, health workers may resume strike Wednesday. Page 2. This is what oftentimes will drive people to so-called private clinics and then to quacks. Atiku may name Benga Daniel as campaign DG. Page 2. I will succeed Buhari or Korocha. That's on page 2. All right, now let's take a look at the editorial of the Nigerian Pilot, and it's on page 3. It says, the real solution to food security crisis. Let's take a look at this, because the editorial, the peg for it is President Buhari's inauguration of the National Food Security Council, which is saddled with the responsibility of exploring the challenges that are capable of causing food security crisis in the country, and then coming up with the best strategy to tackle same.
Well, before I talk about the editorial, let's quickly look at a book that is in the offing. It's written by Dr. Ngozi Okoji-Awela, and it is titled Understanding Challenges of Fighting Corruption. And the book, which is due for launch on the 20th of April, has highlighted the challenges she herself faced in fighting corruption. One of such challenges was that her mother was unfortunately kidnapped, and the kidnappers had actually asked her, tell the mother, tell your daughter who refused to pay oil marketers. She also made a clear revelation that the former president, on his own volition, actually considered elections. And while the bigwigs of the party and government were thinking about how to handle the situation, he just called them and said, gentlemen, I have news for you. I have just called and congratulated the president-elect. And that's how that ended. So that book will throw a lot of information out, particularly about the challenges of fighting corruption. The editorial, you will recall that there's a National Food Security Council that was inaugurated. The challenge for them is to explore and look out for instances that will eliminate the challenges of food scarcity in the country. However, you also recollect that of recent, National Bureau of Statistics indicated that inflation is quite dropping, and the dropping is faster in the rural areas this time around than it is in the urban area. And the impact of that is, again, the agricultural impetuses in the rural areas. But unless that can be sustained broadly, from first the local government level, and secondly at the state level, we are not likely to go anywhere. If you recall, during the tenure of President Olusegun Obasanjo as president, specific amounts were given to states to concentrate on products, agricultural produce, that were predominant in their domain, so that could boost but that came to nothing. So it's good to have agricultural policies, it's good to pursue them, but the national food security, I think, will be able to coordinate all this to ensure that the appropriate links and vacuums are filled to make sure that we are a nation that can feed ourselves, and if possible, export food products to the West African sub-region.
Well, Toby, that's the much we can take. We'd like to thank you for being here today. See you again tomorrow.
Tomorrow, God willing, will be another day.
All right. So still Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be focusing on Nigeria's booming population. 198 million, we are told.
Registration is now open for state and sports clubs to participate with free accommodation and feeding for athletes and officials on the basis of first come, first serve at the first National Grassroots Sports Festival, Sports for All, to discover sport talent, develop future world champions, and rejuvenate sports in Nigeria. Date 19th to 29th of April 2018. Venue, National Stadium, Abuja, packages A and B. This is an opportunity for state governors to mobilize supporters and fans for their state through broadcast sponsorship and for companies to promote their brand. For broadcast sponsorship, contact Angelo Peter I. Elosia, Chairman and Chief Coordinator, or Nick Onyisi. Organizers, Grassroots International Sports Academy and LOP Worldwide Television. Endorsed by the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development. Broadcast partner, NTA, the largest television network in Africa.
Chief. Good morning, sir. You're here already?
No, now my spirit day, my body day for house. What kind of question is that? Were you not the one that fixed this meeting for 8 a.m.? You are now coming by 10 a.m. and start asking me jam questions.
But Chief, now, I'm sorry. Don't you also go late for meetings sometimes? You know now, African time.
No more African time. And no more pancaking of face during office hours. At the end of the day, we will lose valuable time. We will not make progress. If we want to move this nation forward, we must treat business as business and respect time. Change begins with me.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry. Can we go for the meeting now, Chief?
Later.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
All right, you're welcome back. But if you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. This morning, we're, of course, also discussing Africa's largest population. That's the country with Africa's largest population, Nigeria. We are told now that we are some 198 million. We have guests in the studios, but before we introduce our guests, here's a background report put together by our correspondent, Oyemi Ajayi.
It was a shocking news to Nigerians when the National Population Commission, NPC, revealed that the country's official population figure now stands at 198 million. This now makes Nigeria the 7th most populous country in the world and the most populous in Africa. The NPC further predicts that by 2050, Nigeria is most likely to become the 3rd most populated country in the world, and by 2070, Nigeria might have a population of 552 million people. As much as one ponders over this figure with the increasing prospects, the implications are staring us in the face, as it is believed that an uncontrolled population growth could derail Nigeria's economic development. Not just this, it will have adverse effects on the environment as it will lead to an increase in carbon emission. This is due to the fact that more cars as well as generator fumes will get overboard. The air population, human congestion or human population density is quite inevitable with this kind of development, and definitely there will be more energy consumption. Economists have advised the government to enact policies that will help manage the population better. Likewise, sensitization and more awareness must be actively made on family planning programs and more emphasis at educating rural women about family planning. Some experts believe that it is possible to make good use of the increased population by productively engaging the people in order to strengthen the growth of the country, failure of which can bring more harm to the country with more adverse effects on the population. But the profound question remains, can this population explosion be a blessing or a curse? Time will tell.
Thank you very much, Oyeyemi Ajayi, for that background report. And that, of course, is setting the tone for our discussion this morning on Nigeria's booming population of said to be about 198 million. That's a lot. And we have guests here in the studio to actually provide answers to some of the questions raised there on our background report. We're now being joined in the studio by Professor Ken Ife. He is an economic policy analyst. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And also we have with us a regular Good Morning Nigeria, Nazif Dama, Associate Professor of Economics and former Director, National Planning Commission. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, also here in the studios is Mr. Barnabas Atiyaye. He's a town planner as well as a consultant. Mr. Atiyaye, pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
All right, and then from our Lagos Network Center, we have another guest, that's Dr. Ejike Orji. Dr. Orji is Chairman Association for the Advancement of Family Planning. Pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Let's begin, Rhoda. Let's pop the first question to our guest right here in the studios. Gentlemen, tell us what your reaction was when you heard the news that the chairman of the NPC, that is the National Population Commission, had announced in New York that Nigeria's population is now 198 million. No census yet, other than what we had in 2006. Professor Ken Ife.
Well, for me, the news was, it was an earthquake in terms of the population figure. But when you look at the impact on agriculture, I would say is tsunami. And on the first part, is the fact that it has defied all predictions to date. We were working on 200, by 2020 we'll have 200 million people, in 2030 will be 300 million, in 2050 500 million. Of course, that will make us the third largest economy in the country.
Economy or population?
The population. But of course, the 10th largest economy according to $6.4 trillion projection. Now, the thing is that the figure everybody was working on was the optimistic, was 3%. Now that definitely shows that the population is growing at higher than 3%. And the urbanization rate we are all working on was 4.85%. Now it's 6.5%. And the impact of the 6.5% urbanization rate shows that instead of 70% of the people coming into cities in 2050, it's actually going to be something more than 80%. So that is a big danger. And when you weigh it down across sector, you will see why the impact on agriculture is just a tsunami.
All right, let's bring in Nazif Dama. What was your first reaction? And for you, was it a blessing or it was the other way around?
Well, generally, there seems to be multivariate contentions as to whether a population is a blessing or a curse. If you look at it in the context of the reality of our economic development, in the absence of a coherent national development plan and culture, in the absence of a coordinated development strategy, in the absence of lack of coordination between what the federal and state governments are doing, then certainly the population in this context, we can say is a problem. Problem per se, not because individuals are not willing to do what is right, but because the political system and the political leadership have refused to productively engage the population in a systematic manner that every single citizen of this country will add value through improved total factor productivity rather than the scenario we have today. If you recall the figures provided by the National Bureau of Statistics as to the number of young people that are unemployed, and the fact that despite massive unemployment and the fact that only certain few sectors of the economy are explaining the growth that we have and we are able to get out of recession, that tells you the underutilization or the serious underutilization of our population as a productive resource rather than as a liability. If you look at China, they have 1.4 billion people. If you look at Indians, 1.35 billion people. But look at how productive an average Chinese is, and look at how productive an average Indian is. And the key factor behind the productivity of those human beings that are like myself and you is because there is a political leadership and clear direction toward productive engagement rather than the population being a problem. So for me, the population of 198 million people is a serious positive challenge for political leaders at all levels to put our thinking cap and convert this high number into massive productivity and income generation that will provide a basis for prosperity in the context of Africa, so that at least we will realistically answer our name as the giant of Africa.
All right, Dr. Dalmat, thank you very much. Let's bring in now the town planner, that's Barnabas Atiaye. Again, tell us what your reaction was when you heard, for instance, that Nigeria's population is now 198 million and an urbanization rate of 6.5%.
This is really very, very surprising, because to me, that number really shook me to the base. Because particularly when you look at the issue of urbanization and the challenges we currently have, somebody will ask, what has led to this increase in population? Of course, the natural birth, but I've also realized that over the years, our borders are so porous. And so the influx of people from other neighboring countries into Nigeria might have contributed to this explosion. And except something is done, before we even realize that by 2025, we have this number, it will be again more than what we might have actually anticipated. And to me, a crisis is coming in the urban center, because we have a situation where our political elites are after the fast result, quick win. They don't plan for the medium or even the long term. And the moment we don't plan for the long term, and that has to be in terms of planning our cities, then we have a challenge. Any governor wants to just see that he does what he wants to do now. If you bring about the issue of planning the cities, it takes longer time, and they feel not interested in that aspect. And that will place the urban population in a very, very disadvantageous position. Apart from that, we have also realized that this urbanization can never be stopped. It's unstoppable. A lot of people will be coming again to the cities, because that's why they feel they can have better life. But if cities are not planned, and if our rural areas are neglected, then we have a very big challenge in our urban centers.
All right, thank you very much, Barnabas Atiaye. Now let's go to our Lagos Network Center, where we have AGK Orji. Indeed, again, let's get your reaction when you heard that we were 198 million. And I also like to speak to the fact, what are the factors responsible for this boom?
Thank you very much. To say that I was surprised, I was least surprised. The reasons are obvious. In fact, since 2004,
I developed a presentation I call The Paradox of Our Times. And within that presentation, I moved around the country talking to our leaders. And when you ask an average demographer and then ask him, what do you think about the population in Nigeria? And what they were telling me that we're in a demographic crisis. And namely, the three things they named was, one, when you have a very high level of youthful young people, very young people in the country and largely unemployed. The other one, when you have a lot of young people emigrating out of our country. Skilled labor, not a problem because they bring back diaspora and economy. But the most important thing that we are unskilled labor. And then when you also see a large things happening in terms of nationals killing nationals. You remember we had a lot of issues with OPC in the Southwest, and I said more was coming. We had militants in the Niger Delta. We had kidnapping and Bakassi in the Southeast, a religious crisis in on the Plateau, and then Boko Haram. Now we also have herdsman attack. When you look at all of this, you will see that the underlying fact is that the population is just overbearing and that our resources could not manage that kind of population. So why is that happening? Because we haven't had a very robust population policy that has been properly driven. The two major religions that we have in our country do not want to hear about population control. So the narrative has always been, let us make sure that our women space their children and live very youthful and healthy lives. But it's not working. So the important thing here is that our contraceptive prevalence rate stands about 5.6. And then there are a lot of regional disparities. It ranges from 4.5 or 2 in the south and up to the 7.2 in the north. And at the same time, if you look at what is going on in terms of our population projection, in terms of contraception, we said in 2012, by 2018, we should attain 36% contraceptive prevalence rates, that is modern methods. But we rebased it last year at the London Summit. We now say we should be aiming at 27.0% by 2020. So of course we have found out that it was not going to be a reality. So if we really have to get out of this, we need to focus on our on making sure that we have family planning services across to our people. The FP 2020 Summit in London in 2012 said that all countries, especially 69 poorest countries of the world, and that is countries that had an income per capita less than $2,500, should please make sure that additional 120 million women get family planning services by 2020. The midterm was last year. Only 30 million women had been able to access family planning services. Unfortunately, the countries that are not doing well are in sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria is majorly one of those countries.
Dr. Orji, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Let's return to our guests here in Abuja studios. Well, the figure is 198 million Nigerians, according to the chairman of the Population Commission. Professor Kanife, are you worried, for instance, that well, this figure is on the basis of a projection? The last census exercise we had was in 2006. We're supposed to have had a census in 2018, which is this year, and there's no indication now when we would have a census. Is this figure likely, therefore, to be prejudicial to whatever census figures we might get, whatever we then decide to conduct a census? And if we were to interrogate the basis for the current projection at 198, would you be satisfied with the current figure?
I think I wouldn't see any new projection going too far away from this figure, because as evidence, the evidence we have is that there's a lot of people coming into the country through the porous borders, in addition to natural birth. But let me tell you that other predictions have been playing out. In 2010, we kept hearing about demographic time bomb, and that was, you saw, Ban Ki-moon was at the forefront of this, and he said by 2030. We need to produce 30% more food to feed the population. And for Nigeria, we were expecting, as I said, 2030, 300 million people. Now, the climate change people said whether we like it or not, there will be 30% less food produced in the world because of climatic conditions. We know that in the case of Nigeria, about 60 years is the average age of our farmer. So a lot of days by 2030, they're already on departure lounge. Some have bought tickets, some have got boarding pass. But the fact of the matter is that probably most of them won't be there. And all the young people are trooping into the urban cities. So who's going to grow the food for this population that is growing out of control? But the crisis is not just on that, but it's the fact that we haven't actually looked at what the African Union keeps saying. African Union says that in agriculture, 80% of primary produce are done by women. 80% of the primary processing, food, primary, is done by women. And 90% of selling of these primary things are also done by women. It tells you how central women could be in agriculture policy. But also they said, put 10% of your budget in agriculture. We only put 4%. But more importantly, if our growth of agriculture GDP is 4.38%, and urbanization rate is 6.5%, we have to grow the agriculture at least 7%, if not 10. 7% is the minimum we should grow to make sure that we have enough food to feed the population. But we know that all these are hostage to fortune. We've seen the problem with inflation, which is why we can't get access to finance as quickly as we would, because all indices are low, about 11% on all the indices. But then when you look at the food basket itself, it stays around 17, 18, 19. So which means that even though we are trying to produce a reasonable amount of food, a lot of them are going out to our borders, through our borders to the neighboring French countries, those 5 countries surrounding us. And they are buying them with impunity because the food is cheap to them, 50% cheaper, because our currency has actually gone down. If 1 naira could buy 3 sefa, now it can only buy 1.5.
All right.
So we have serious crisis.
All right, Professor Kenny, thanks a lot. Let's bring in Dr. Nazif Dama again into this. Nazif Dama, still on interrogating the accuracy, if you like, of the current projection of 198 million Nigerians without a census figure. Is this a sense in which, is there a sense rather in which we should be less apprehensive, or as Professor Kenny Ife has said, whatever figures we might have in any census that we might conduct sometime in the future could be an approximation of what the chairman has indicated?
Well, you know, in reality, the National Population Commission and any other agency coming out with projections have, or rather use, scientifically verifiable means and processes that go through a validation process. So significantly, the final census figure may not necessarily deviate much from the projection that we have. But as Professor Ipe said, and as we have said times without number, the issue is not just about the numbers, but the issue is what we do with the numbers. With a growing population, there is likely to be more crisis between farmers and herders. There is likely to be more negative impacts on environment and its preservation. There's also likely to be a higher level of urbanization, possibly beyond the 6.5% that we witness currently. There's also likely to be more crime and social vices. But the fundamental question is, what are we going to do differently now than what we are doing previously in order to turn this increased number of Nigerians into a source of economic prosperity and sustainable development? It's not just about the people coming to the city, it's also about people living in the rural areas. It's about the farming population. It's about the number of young people that you need to attract into farming population, because as said previously, the average age of people within the farming population is over 60. Now, what specific incentives and strategies are you putting in place in order to attract young people into modern agriculture? And then there is also a problem associated with agricultural modernization, which has been advocated as a means of improving productivity. Yes, It is logical to use modernization in order to improve productivity, but certainly there is a level to which you can use modernization without leading to negative consequences. We have seen in some countries like in Latin America where genetical modification of crops have led to serious negative and health implications. And we have also seen a situation whereby people will be advocating for intensive mechanization. Now, there is an element of conflict between intensive mechanization in a population, in a country that is highly populated. While you need to improve agricultural production in order to feed the additional population, you must also be careful with the level of modernization that you'll introduce into agriculture in a way that will not lead to factor reversals. A situation whereby a country is highly populated but is using intensive mechanization and then improve production, but at the same time making so many young people idle. So I think the fundamental question is for we, the elites, to work as a team, put our thinking cap and see what short, medium, and long-term strategies we need to put in place in order to turn this population into a source of prosperity. For me, population in terms of numbers as it is today, believe me sincerely, if we work assiduously, we have the right political leadership, this population can be the greatest source of prosperity in 21st century.
All right, thank you very much, Nazif Dama. Let's bring in now Barnabas Ateayi. It's perceived that by 2050, about 70% of a population would be in cities. And looking at the infrastructure that we have right now, what is actually fueling urbanization and how can we put a halt to it?
Thank you. It is obvious that the urban population is growing. And as at 2016, it was actually 50-50. 50 urban, 50 rural, as against what we had at independence, that was 30-70. Now, the challenge we are having is that whenever we bring the aspect of planning, it is being downplayed. Because I remember that in 1976, Max Locke did a lot of master plans for virtually all the cities in the north. Most of such master plans have been kept on the table, and it has never been, implemented. And that's a challenge, because, in planning, we use population to make projections and plan. For each facility, there's a capacity. Now, our infrastructure is based on population. Our, services, they are based on, population. And for instance, education, we need to know the population to plan for that. For roads, in terms of capacity. For houses, in terms of, so these are things that have been taken care of in master plans. Now, most of these developed nations, they are moving seamlessly because the master plan is being adhered to, and there is no compromise in that. And because of that, there is like a very smooth transition, no matter the population. And I say that the Nigerian population cannot intimidate us, really, if we do the right thing at the right time. If we do the right thing at the right time, we have the capacity to move the population to reach its target. However, in Abuja, for instance, the influx of the population supersedes the planning that has been done in terms of provision of infrastructure. There are so many places that have been planned, but infrastructure has not been given because of resources. Look at Lokogoma, for instance. It's a place that has been planned quite all right, but no roads, drainage is not there, and that kind of a thing. So it's a challenge that we have to face as a nation, and then bring the right thing, do the right thing first. Let us get our cities planned. Let us get all the facilities done. Now he was talking about agriculture that must be, promoted. Yes, that must be. But are we talking about industrialization? If we have industries that can, couple the products of agricultural products, then that will be nice. When people are being deprived of or taken away from agriculture because of mechanization, they can come to be employed in the industrial sector. We have a lot of youth, really, that are there dormant and they don't know what to do. Going back to the village, for some, may not work. And let us take this one as a reality and plan for our youths as they are coming. They are educated, they are brilliant, they are very innovative, and if they are, then what are we doing to really capture that kind of passion they have for what they want to do, and yet there is no enabling space for them? The enabling space for them is what will make us really move forward. Population has always been advantageous if you harness the people at the right time and give them the right direction to do what they need to do for a living. But by the time you have come, everybody comes to the city in expectations, and there's no houses, then we end up getting a lot of slums in our cities. And that, of course, as one of us rightly said, has led to a lot of criminal activities. Health also challenge will be there, epidemic may come, and so many other challenges that has not been anticipated. So these are issues that we have to really look at. I am promoting the fact that let governments be able to pick out, identify the cities we have. Of course, it has been stated that all our local government headquarters are have been declared urban centers, regardless of the population. So if we have plans, good plans for such, it will really reduce some of the challenges we are anticipating. And then we give a kind of, the economic experts will now come and tell us what to do if we utilize our resources in this country effectively.
Well, you keep saying if. Yes. If we plan well, if we utilize our resources well, if we manage our population well, what is the experience? Are we doing the right things at the right time?
That is the point. We are not.
All right. That means that there's a greater challenge. Perhaps then, as some persons will argue, Rhoda, rather than talking about urbanization, we might as well be seeing slumization of Nigerian cities. Let's return to Dr. Orji at our Lagos Network studios. Dr. Orji, I'd like you to speak some more about the demographic crisis that the country faces on account of the population boom. What do you see as a demographic crisis? Some persons have always argued, particularly the market economists, they say, our population size is a huge advantage in terms of markets. But of course, the counter argument to that is that if you are a consuming rather than a producing nation, then you're set for doom. But again, speak some more to the demographic crisis that Nigeria faces.
Thank you very much. When I hear we can harness our population and then we become giants, truly giants, yes, that's correct. But we have to put it in a proper context. If you look at what happened generally in the world, if you look at the population of the world in the past 1,000 years, in fact, about 1,000 years ago, all countries were almost at the same level of poverty until the turn of the last 2 centuries, where countries like Britain started a process of improving the life of their people and improving the space for individuals getting their rights. And then that led to eventually the Industrial Revolution and then the economic boom that happened in some of those countries. What we have right now in Nigeria in a few years' time is either going to be a demographic trap, or if we work assiduously to do clear things. It's not just about working with the population that we have. The first thing that has to happen is that we must reduce our population growth rate. The statistical data that the National Population Commission came out with was based on a 3.2% growth every year since we had our last census in 2006. That's what's giving us this projection of about 198 million. So the first thing that we need to do is to slow down our birth rates. If we do not slow down our birth rate, no matter the investment we make in our population, it will not work. The demographic dividends you've seen across the nations of the world. Let's take, for instance, the major ones, China. When I hear people say the population of China, if we increase, because they invested in that population, and that's why they are taking over almost the whole world. But there was something they did very clearly. China introduced one child, one policy. I don't subscribe to forcing people as a rights activist. Every family planning service must be driven by the rights of the woman or the man. So they introduced that they slowed down considerably their population growth rate, but massively invested in their youth. That's why you have a demographic dividend in China right now. India is approaching that also. A few years ago, India, if you see Indians, in Nigeria you had Indians all over the places, teachers, physicists, all sorts of people. Now they've all gone back. The reason is also that Tata, who is a giant, a conglomerate, in 1970 called two of his colleagues in the private sector, it wasn't even the government, and said, look, the way our population is growing and our factories, we don't even have good hands to work in our factories. We need to make sure that we slow down the population and have human beings that can work. And that's what Tata did, introduce the Family Planning Foundation in India, and then eventually supported by the government. But they had a two-child policy, and they reduced their population growth rate. So in Nigeria, the first things that we need to do is to reduce the rate of maternal mortality. We are the second country with the largest number of deaths from women, and part of it is because of lack of appropriate contraception. Family planning will reduce maternal mortality by 30%, and with all the attendant salutary effects it will have in the population. But coming back to the point that you were asking me to make about the problem that we have as a crisis. Like I mentioned before, I had already outlined the three things that shows us that we're in a demographic crisis. But let me put more meat in it. Take, for instance, immigration. When I was screaming with my colleagues, people like Professor Ladipo, who I took over as the chairman of Association for the Advancement of Family Planning, we say clearly that our youth are leaving the country in droves. In fact, statistics show that 14% of people who cross the Mediterranean Sea to go to Europe are Nigerians. Nobody believed that Nigerians were really going in droves until recently when we started repatriating our children from Libya. Plain loads of our Nigerian children, some of them have been sold to slavery. This is immigration of our young people leaving our country for other countries. Now, let us look at the issue of security. I think in your analysis today, in the newspaper analysis, is killings everywhere. Who are those ones killing? Nigerians are killing Nigerians. Those are part of the demographic crisis imperatives. And then also let us look at the issue of what are we really doing? Are we putting a lot of work? Yes, the federal government has a lot of policies. There are this social reinvestment program. It's a good start. But we need to make sure that it's transparent and accountable so that some of these jobs that we're talking about will get to our children. But most importantly, we must increase our contraceptive prevalence rate. Otherwise, no matter the investment we make, the population growth rate will still outstrip whatever we do. Yes, the population now could be a blessing, but I can tell you what I see on the table right now. I'm not a prophet of doom, but we're getting into a demographic trap unless we do three clear things: reduce our maternal deaths, reduce our population growth rate, and invest massively in our youth to give them good education, appropriate education that can make them have a job, and improve our healthcare system. And then also make sure that we have equity and justice, like our have said, our forefathers in the things that we do in this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ejike Orji. Now let's take comments coming in from our viewers via our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. You can still be a part of this conversation if you tweet at us at our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Now, the very first tweet we have is from Festus Akimboyoa. He says, National Population Commission had not conducted any census recently. Therefore, the 198 million figure is a guess. If it is true we are 198 million, there will be issues around food and water, especially when huge amount of food we produce is wasted due to lack of inadequate infrastructure. I don't think the Nigerian government had ever done anything to control our population. Time for family planning across Nigeria. We also need to do something about immigration because our country is a magnet for many Africans.
All right, this is Beneme Dominic who is tweeting. Our population, honestly, should be of much concern to all. It has increased poverty and low living standards amongst Nigerians. We need a bold step, enact and enforce a law on not more than 2 children for every family. we must plan our families for good.
This one is from Sofina to 2012. Says, this is supposed to help our government in planning for health, housing, education, and other economic developments. But the reverse is the case in Nigeria. Please, governments, engage capable hands to build our nation.
Dele Jack Solomon tweets that as a nation, it is imperative that we address the issue of population explosion because uncontrolled population growth will increase the degree of social vices, terrorism, kidnapping, and other crimes that we are experiencing now, and eventually derail Nigeria's economic development.
Victor Ohoswama tweets, he says, while large population has its merits like large human resource and markets, but an uncontrolled population is inimical to economic development as resources and infrastructure will be overstretched, leading to poverty. We need a policy to restrict number of children per parent.
Omar Ben tweets, now the population boom, when well managed, could be a blessing. But the opposite could also be devastating. The nation needs to be industrialized to take advantage of the population boom. This could come through realistic policies and good legislation.
Jima Rashid tweets, says, population is a good strength for any nation when the citizens are well skilled and huge markets, because people's earnings are high, while it becomes a huge burden when we have a large army of elites and illiterate, and unskilled people. And that's why we're currently witnessing social unrest.
Unrest, I believe.
Yeah,
social unrest. Rhoda. Now, Adebayo Adeiga tweets, now, we can use the population to our own advantage if we invest in human capital, and there's a future for this country because we have a high number of youth.
Law Alpha 2C tweets, it said the spiral rise in population in Nigeria is a serious issue which should engage the government in how to plan for the future. The Nigerian government can rise to the occasion to control the population by way of legislation and result-oriented maternal framework.
Amabwala Hambabs tweets, India and China today are not dependent on the U.S. or any other developed nation for their survival. Their population is enough for them to make their economies prosper. If Nigeria has the right leadership with the mental preparedness to change the narrative, she will be a force.
Finally, Mike Anyako tweets, says population is power, population is wealth, population positively drives the economy. China is a force to reckon with today because of her population. Unfortunately, we do not harness the potentials of our population in Nigeria. We need our large numbers as a deterrent instead of a gain. All right, those are the tweets that we have coming from you, our viewers, via Twitter handle at NTAGMN. We'll take a break now. Remember, you can still be a part of this conversation via Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Stay with us.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Thank you very much for still with us, for being with us still rather on Good Morning Nigeria. And we have all our guests in Lagos and here in the Abuja studios. Let's return to our guests in the Abuja studios right here with us. Professor Ken, if beginning with you again, let's look at the spectrum of what is required to be done in considering all of the factors that you have raised and the many more that you could still raise with regard to our population numbers. If the projection has been done on the basis of a growth rate of 3.2%, Now, the received wisdom always was that your economy needs to grow at a higher percentage, at a higher rate than 3.2 for you to survive. So what do we need to do to accelerate our economic growth rate to overtake our population growth rate? That's one. Secondly, we discussed illiteracy, the phenomenon of illiteracy in Nigeria, just last week on Good Morning Nigeria. And the worrisome figure is that at least 1/3 of Nigerians are illiterate. They can't read, they can't write, and they can't compute. So how then do you mine this population? How then do you transform this 1/3 illiterate population, which is still growing at the rate of 3.2%, and then get in all the right mix of factors that could turn this into an advantage rather than a menacing crisis?
China, everybody mentions China, but I want to tell you something about China. Over the last 20 to 30 years, China's policy has brought 700 million people out of poverty. China's policy has brought 400 million people into the middle class. Economy grows when middle class grows. That is one thing. And that's why Africa got left behind, because there was no significant growth in the middle class. Every economy every continent moved by moving their middle class. Now, when you have a challenge like this, what you do is you have a strategy, immediately develop a strategy to address the challenge. You don't start looking at what you have already to see how you fit it in. You create a strategy that would come head on with the challenge. So this requires a strategy. I know we have economic recovery and growth plan. Please keep that aside because it has an energy of its own and a momentum of its own. We need to get a strategy to deal with this. Now, it's all going to result in allocation of resources and reallocation of resources. So until that time, I know that I've heard that the NPC has a strategy document with the president waiting to be approved. I'm not privy to the content of it, but whatever it is that is on the pipeline, there are urgencies that the government at both federal, President Buhari, and the governors have to do right now in the context of reallocating resources. Now, what should they do? First of all, what you do is you carry out an urgent review. You carry out an urgent policy review from the standpoint of economic and social inclusion, because that's where all this population is hitting. Now, let me leave the social inclusion because there's a lot of people talking about health agenda, one demographic, there is a lot. Let me focus on economic inclusion. Now, unemployment is the critical dimension. And then, of course, you have MSME as the critical dimension because they generate the jobs. It's not government. Government can't give you jobs. So what it is that, and then I've also underlined the criticality of women empowerment in the context of agriculture. So there are 3 items that will loom very large. So when you're carrying out a policy review, carry out policy review on a monetary policy, on a fiscal policy, industrial, and a trade policy. Those are the key policies that affect our economy in a serious way. So when you carry out that review, always look at how it impacts MSME development, employment creation, and gender. Those are the 3. And secondly, government meetings and agenda and policy discussions must always have a standing item in the agenda. And those standing items on economic inclusion should be, how does this discussion affect MSME growth? How does it affect employment? How does it affect gender? And then thirdly, as the projects and proposals and programs come to Executive Council at state level and come to Federal Executive Council at federal level, they should send this back and say, address me on the impact or the implication of this on gender, on employment, and on MSME development. Just that is why you switch resources. Immediately you start switching resources rather than wait forever. Wait until presidential assent comes to whatever proposal has been sent to it. Wait until you revise the ERPG. You just wait. You just start switching resources by executive action.
All right. Professor Kenny, thanks a lot. But Dr. Nazib Dama, what's your take on this? Well, with regard to what we need to do along the spectrum across the various levels of government and across the various policy incubation systems?
Well, you know, Kingsley, the reality is that a very strong internal market of 198 million people is a key requirement for sustainable development and prosperity. And I have said these times without number in this forum, and I will continue to say it. The quantum of public sector resource availability is extremely inadequate relative to our needs. And the reality is that public sector is the instrumentality through which whatever economic expansion and policy can be implemented through. We have a proposed budget of 26.3 billion. The economy is still public sector dependent, though private sector driven. We need to have honest, realistic, and transparent conversation among public sector managers and private sector operators in such a way that our costing of projects and programs will be realistic in line with international benchmarks. When we do that, so much resources can be attracted into our national economy, particularly through public-private partnership, and through which you can embark on massive infrastructural projects that will drive the aggregate demand for the economy, while simultaneously undertaking specific sectoral policy reviews in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of monetary policy, in terms of trade policy, in terms of industrial policy, so that at the end of the day, Nigerians will significantly produce domestically what we need and what we consume and what we use. A situation whereby over 70 to 80% of what we use, including myself and you, look at our clothes. They are imported. We have massive number of textile companies that have clothes in Nigeria. We have the Textile Revival Fund, which has attracted over 150 billion. Nobody is talking about that. Nobody is working as a team to revive the industries. If China is industrialized, if India is industrialized, what is it that Nigeria cannot industrialize and produce domestically what we are importing? These individuals are not superior to us in terms of intellectual capacity. We have the capacity, but who will organize Nigerians toward realistic action? It is the government. It is the political leaders. And that is why we need a complete change and direction in the manner and attitude of political leaders so that we can be doing what is positive for Nigeria now and in the future.
Thank you very much, Nazif Dama. Now let's go to our Lagos Network Center where we have Mr. Dr. Ejike Oji. Dr. Ejike, taking it up from where Nazif Dama stopped, that is, what can all levels of government, policymakers do to ensure that our economy is at par with our population growth? But I also like you to speak to the issue of birth control. How can our birth control message be more effective?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted that my colleagues in Abuja have talked about investment in our population, which is key. But the other very important component is, like I said before, reducing our birth rates and then also reducing our death rate. Those are the cardinal first steps, and I want to underline that, the cardinal first steps. And then what should we do in that direction? I'm glad that the federal government has made a lot of commitments in terms of improving our contraceptive prevalence rates. Like I said, they made a commitment that it will be 27% by 2020. Currently, it's 14.7%. So we're still waiting for the National Demographic Health Survey to come up with the final estimate, but at least some estimations put it at 14.7 as we speak. So it's a tall order for us to make 27% within the next 2 years or 3. So I'm sure if we work very hard, we'll be able to attain that. The other one is that, yes, the federal government also has made some commitments in terms of putting counterpart funding for our family planning commodities, where initially our association was able to convince government to put $3 million. Now they've upped it by $1 million, it's $4 million, but that's far, far below what we need as a nation. We are still supported by development partners in terms of the commodities that we need for our family planning services. So that's said, and that means the commitment is going on there. But the only other thing I want to mention before I move on this issue of providing resources for commodities. You know, health is on the concurrent list. So what this means, the federal government cannot prescribe to the states or push them to do things. They can only advocate. So some of the issues that we're having in terms of lack of family planning penetration in the country is actually at the sub-national level, at the states and local government levels. The states are not investing enough in issues of family planning. And that's why we need to, as a people, and urging the media, we must continue to talk to our governors to make sure they put more money in investing and making sure that women have appropriate family planning services. The other thing is we need to look at health holistically. For you to have demographic dividend when you have the kind of population we have now, you must make sure that the health of the population is improved very, very well, because that would lead to reduction in morbidities and deaths, which is a cardinal component of going to the demographic dividend. In the year 2001, Nigeria was the host of the AU summit, and Obasanjo, our president as at that time, was the chairman of AU. And the African states took a decision that all countries should go back and make sure that they increase the budgetary allocation to their healthcare sector by minimum 15%. Nigeria has not attained that. The highest we had done is about 6-point-something%. As we speak, we are at about 4.2% based on the last budgetary allocation to health. Now, I hear people also saying that we have improved in terms of quantum of naira we have put in the healthcare sector. But that's a misnomer, because if you look at the last year's budget in terms of capital expenditure in the healthcare sector, it's actually 70% of what we spent in 2007 in terms of the naira value, if you look at the devaluation. And just like a colleague of us said there, most of the things we use are important. In the healthcare, almost everything that is of quality we import. So if we denominate our healthcare sector in dollar terms, we're actually spending 30% less than we spent in 2007. And we can see that our population projection, we have actually increased so much. So we actually is spending less in terms of capital expenditure on each of Nigerians moving around in the country right now. So it's important that we focus on some of these issues. And then in terms of what is it that we're going to do to drive family planning, our association, the Association of Advancement of Family Planning, has been working with the Federal Ministry of Health, and then to make sure that all civil society organizations work actively at the sub-national level to bring this issue of contraception to the fore and make sure there's accountability in the resources that they are released, and then also encourage governments at that level to invest more. And one of the key things that is very, very important in what we're doing is that this year we're going to have another family planning conference in November or October or even December. And it's just to bring this to the national, should I say, point that people will start focusing on it. The case of not being able to invest in family planning is really a tragedy. And I'm sure, like I said, the federal government is making those commitments, and then we want the states to come on. So those are the kinds of things that I think if we do in terms of the healthcare sector, and then do what we have to do. The Federal Ministry of Health also has developed what we call the Costed Implementation Plan, which is a proper roadmap of how we are going to make sure that we have family planning in Nigeria. Only 6 states, 6 have done that CIP. The rest have not done it. And then also, if we look at the Costed Implementation Plan, they have also gone ahead to develop what I will say is a roadmap, a policy to make sure that this is taken to the Nigerian public in terms of a media strategy. So these are some of the things the federal government is doing, but we feel it's not enough for now. We should do more. The important thing, the will is there, but let us invest more. And most importantly, the National Health Act, which is another act of parliament that says minimum 1% of our resources in terms of income should be put in the healthcare sector. And if you look at some of this data we're talking about also, a lot of poor health indicators are actually at the primary healthcare level. 45% of that National Health Act money will go to that level and improve our health services. And that will be part of making sure that we have a demographic dividend moving forward.
Just before we take our next set of tweets, Dr. Odge, still with you at our Lagos Network Center. You talked about the fact that state governments do not appear to be enthusiastic about population management issues, namely birth control. From your experience, what explains the lethargy of the subnational governments in responding to population management issues? That's one leg. And secondly, while I was speaking earlier, and we all know this, the two major faiths in the country have often had their own issues with regard to birth control measures. What is likely to shock them into positive action in light of what we are seeing and in light of the consequences that you guys have so eloquently elaborated?
Yes, my guess at the subnational level in terms of investment in the family planning, most politicians do not see family planning as a vote-winning strategy in their campaign trail. The reason is that we have not been able to bring the narrative that the population, that the security challenges that we're having at this point in time is because our population is putting pressure on our resources. So it takes a good political motivated person to do something that is really very, very good in terms of population. And I will bold to say that I'm in Lagos. I'm proud to say that the Lagos government has done so much work in that area. Bauchi states and then a few other states have done a lot of work. So we're encouraging other governors. So the lethargy in terms of that population is that people still look at the two major religions when they are campaigning. They don't want to say anything they feel that the two major religions will not like. But like you said, how will the faith look at it? At the association, we have an interfaith forum. We've been able to work with the two major religions in the country to develop a Christian perspective for family planning. And then also we've worked with the Islamic clerics to develop the Islamic perspectives for family planning. In the last meeting that we had, national planning meeting, family planning meeting we had 2 years ago, there was a major pre-conference of interfaiths, and we're going to repeat that this year again. So we're talking with our faith-based leaders, and they are listening, and they are working with us to make sure that we do not have a population that will be a problem to us, but a population that will be a kind of source of glory to us. So yes, we are working with interfaith. It's a work in progress, and we're still advocating, and that's one of the key planks of what we're doing, to tell the federal government, especially the Federal Ministry of Health, to please keep advocating to our governors and go make presentations at the Governors Forum. If they see truly the path that we are taking, I'm sure as leaders they will do the needful. The important thing is that we must continue to get the correct narrative that will make them understand that if we continue on this path, we will not enjoy our old age. And that's what I tell my colleagues. If we want to be old and enjoy our old age, we need to invest in what is going on now, especially the youth.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ejike Orji, Chairman, Association for the Advancement of Family Planning. You joined us from our Lagos Network Center. Thank you very much for your thoughts and your time on Good Morning Nigeria today. Also, would also love to thank our guests here in the studio who have joined us for our conversation. But before that, I think we'll take the tweets.
Yeah, let's take some tweets and then get the closing thoughts of our guests. Then we have this tweet from a handle that said, soft clicks. It says, for me, no cause for alarm. Increase in population will actually turn out to be a good thing if the leaders will initiate programs that will encourage the mammoth population to be productive.
And John Ifejika Twitter says, how can you talk about population control? Well, the country is actually overpopulated and it's being populated by us. Abe
Alao has this tweet. 198 million population is not a joke. But where did we get this figure from? Because population census has not been held.
Mutanu Farouk tweets, one of the yardsticks for physical planning of a nation is the population. Population is the backbone and spinal cord of a budget. It seems to me that the 2018 budget may have economic deformity because the main ingredients for preparing a budget is not vertical.
And then we have this from Adebayo Adeiga. China and the U.S. use their population to produce goods using labor-intensive methods. Nigeria can emulate this method for development. Also, culture and people's mentality and lack of education is a major cause of this problem, while on the aspects of the youth, there's a lack of jobs.
Abdul Musa tweet says the implication amongst others would be a high rate of illiteracy, high maternal mortality rate and a high rate of crime if proper planning is not considered in earnest. Instead of our growing population becoming a source of strength, the reverse might be the case.
Akeju Olagbaju tweets, now for those of us in agriculture, we are constantly reminded of population growth and mindful that our country, Nigeria, will be the third or at least the fourth most populous country on the planet by year 2050. Now, this calls for attention on how we can feed the population. Those are the second set of tweets. Just before we sign off our guests, there are two issues on the table. Well, the first one has to do with, again, what was always seen as perhaps one of the most effective strategies in dealing with population explosion, namely, increased education for women, and then also increased economic opportunities for women. That all of this combined could then conduce to that. But if we have increased child education to a considerable extent, how come we are still having the kind of population explosion that we are seeing, 3.2%, well above the average that we have had in terms of our growth rate. And then the other issue, of course, I'll let the two economists speak to that. For the town planner, you said, if we did this right, if we did that right. But some persons will say that a number of our urban centers, including, unfortunately, in certain respects, the Federal Capital Territory, are just chaotic scenes. What do you envisage if there is no reversal of the kind of things that we are seeing? Access of the population to potable water, public potable water, is very infinitesimal, as we can see. We have infrastructural challenges and so on and so forth. What do you envisage? The transportation, intermodal transportation system is also not expanding to meet the expansion in the population. What do you foresee in another 10, 20 years?
Well, I want to believe that this country is moving forward. And whenever the issue of our cities comes up, there are two things that I think are critical. You've talked about education. Honestly, there must be a complete overhaul of our educational system. The issue of ability to read or write is not the matter. There should be some kind of technical training that people could be self-employed. If they are self-employed, they will not wait for white-collar jobs. But so far, I have seen that we are going to have more crises if our educational system is not really addressed. And unfortunately, those that are lecturers or teachers must have capacity built up. Most of them don't even know what to teach. And I mean what I'm saying. Go to the primary schools. The lecturers, the teachers there hardly can communicate in English. Come to the secondary school. A lot of students are just sitting on the floor. What could they learn? Go to the university or our polytechnics. Assignments, and then they go to Google and then come out. They are just interested in certificate. There must be a change in terms of our educational aspirations, and either also emphasize vocational or technical schools, so that people can really come up and be on their own, particularly if the infrastructure is available, assuming power. If we have enough power, there are a lot of youth that can really go into their self-employment. Now, coming to the city itself, look at the issue of transportation. We ought to have by now started coming up with mass transport within the city. We are still allowing individuals to do that, and that creates crisis. There are cities in this world that can carry 6 million people at a go because of the availability of train, rail, and the rest of that. And I think except our cities start adapting that, we shall always have a gridlock in our cities. That's one. Two, in terms of the other infrastructure, honestly speaking, water, housing, and electricity, this must be a priority to government.
All right, thank you very, very much, Barnabas Tiaye. Thank you very much. Now, very quickly, Nazif Dama, what can we do in the short, long-term, medium-term to avert what experts see as a doom that is coming?
Well, Kingsley earlier alluded to one aspect relating to girl child education and possibly as a catalyst for reducing maternal mortality and slowing our birth rate. Yes, investment in education has been made, but not sufficient investment in education has actually been made. That is one. Now, number two, significantly in most other countries where they have seriously reduced the population growth rate, they have expanded economic opportunities, improved factor productivity at individual levels so that people work more and have less time for relaxation. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, a significant proportion of the total productivity in agriculture is contributed by women. But unfortunately, because we have refused to undertake specific result-oriented land reforms, ownership of land and access to credit is extremely low. So when we want to reduce poverty, we want to expand the population of the country, reduce the expansion in the population, we must improve productivity by improving access to credit through collateralization. And simultaneously, governmental policy working with every single stakeholder towards consultation and developing a coherent communication strategy that will slow down the birth rate by improving or advocating child spacing is very imperative for our sustainable development and prosperity.
All right, thank you very much, Nazif Dama. Professor Kenny Faye, let's get your closing thoughts.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong fundamentally wrong in a healthy population growth, provided that it is matched by advances in the productive capacity, and in particular looking at the disadvantaged sector, which is the women, and making sure that they are included. And focusing strongly on employment. Employment creates the revenue, it creates the disposable income. With the disposable income, you can pay for health care, you can pay for water and sanitation, you can pay for better education. That's the market economy. But we've got to critically focus on employment. So do a policy review from government point of view on these, and have a strategy to deal with what has appeared as a strong challenge, and then make sure that we immediately start diverting resources to these critical objectives.
All right, Professor Kenny Faye, an economic policy analyst and regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, thanks a lot for being around today.
Thank you very much.
Our appreciation also to Dr. Nazif Dama, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Abuja and former Director of the National Planning Commission. Thanks a lot, Dr. Dama, for being on Good Morning Nigeria again.
Thanks, Kingsley.
Our appreciation also to a town planner and consultant, Barnabas Tiaye. Thanks a lot for your thoughts.
Thank you so much.
And once again, we'd like to thank our guest in Lagos, Dr. Ejike Oji, Chairman, Association for the Advancement of Family Planning. Thanks a lot for being with us on the program today. All right, now that does it for our discussion segment. Let's go over very quickly now to our sports desk to find out what is happening.
Super Eagles captain John Mikelobi has opened his goal account for Tianjin Teda in the Chinese Super League this season. Mikel's 27th minute strike helped Tianjin Teda to a 2-1 comeback win at home against Guangzhou RNF on Saturday. The win was Tianjin's second in the league this season, which